trauma is never the event. Trauma is a series of experiences that left you interpreting life through a very specific lens at a very young age that maybe at the time was appropriate, but it's not anymore.
Affirmations don't work if you haven't done some of this inner, younger work with these parts of you. You can say, I'm good enough, but until you've given some compassion and worked with and spoken to and helped that 6-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 13-year-old that doesn't believe that, it's kind of irrelevant.
There's this inherent assumption that every single therapist, every mental health practitioner is trained in trauma, and they're not.
For the first time in my entire life, I thought there's nothing wrong with nothing wrong with me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I'm your host Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is Sherry Crowley. And guys, this is going to be a phenomenal conversation, and it likely will not be the last time that you hear Sherry on the podcast. Let me just tell you really quickly a little bit about Sherry, and we're going to get right into it. So Sherry's a licensed clinical social worker. She's a therapist. She focuses on trauma. She specializes in trauma. She's done a lot of the similar training that I have. She is currently understanding parts work and learning internal family systems with Frank Anderson, which if you've never followed Frank, I highly recommend following Frank Anderson. He's got a great Instagram handle. You can start right there. She also has trained and learned more about complex PTSD with Janina Fisher. She's a really big name in the space. And she's also incorporating tapping and emotional freedom technique into her practice. And she's here today to talk about burnout. And this is really exciting because I also talk a lot about burnout, and we come to it from the very same angle. So I'm going to get right into it. How are you today, Sherry?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. To speak with you.
It's going to be great. So before we get started and we talk about why you focus on burnout, right? Because I think we both focus on it for similar reasons. You and I were talking off camera, and I wanted to bring this to light at the very beginning because it's so important that as people like you and I who are trying to educate masses of people on what trauma really is and how to resolve it, it's important for people to understand it's awesome that Sherry's gone through this additional training, because trauma is not an inherent part of a therapist's curriculum.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, Sherry?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. It's at least I can't speak for the psychologists, but in social work training, just general social work training, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, as you said. It's not, we don't delve into it. Maybe it's mentioned, but there's no in grad school or just in fellowships or general training after, you have to seek it out. And it's such a large piece of so many issues. I don't know if I'm sure you've explained this in other episodes of your show, but there's trauma. I think a lot of times people hear trauma and they think it has to be like this one major event of violence generally, or natural disaster or war, but so much of trauma is, as we were talking about off air, complex trauma, which is an ongoing way that you've lived because of the dynamics of your family and things growing up in childhood, and it's not so overt for many.
Amen. And this is what I say. I say you've got that big T trauma, right? That's what people think of, and I call it the triple A. It's abuse, aggression, acts of violence, and then there can already be war, and there can be accidents and what have you. But we know when we see big T trauma, but I know what I see in my practice primarily, though I do see big T trauma, there's no question about it, is what you just said, this covert mist of dysfunction.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
That we were told was normal.
Yes.
And we don't understand, excuse my French, why we're so fucked up.
Yeah. You don't know. You're in the tapestry and you don't.
It's in the tapestry. That's right.
You are.
And I always say it's a prolonged series of experiences that left you feeling unseen, unheard, insignificant, unimportant, not enough in your developmental years.
That's exactly. I love when you said the mist. What did you say? The mist?
It's a mist of dysfunction.
I love that.
It just is. It's just this ever present. And you don't even know it's a mist. You can see right through it because it's your normal.
Yeah.
But my point is, before we get into the burnout, but it's so important for people to understand that when you feel stuck in life and you've made the courageous, vulnerable decision to go talk to somebody and you've decided to go talk to a therapist, there's this inherent assumption that every single therapist, every mental health practitioner is trained in trauma, and they're not.
No, definitely.
And so it's unfortunate because then I have people that come to me that say, I'm trauma resistant. Nothing works for me. I'm so broken.
Right.
Because nothing's ever worked. And to your point, what you said earlier is so much of our challenge and so much of our stuckness is rooted in complex PTSD or CPTSD. So if the practitioner is not trained in trauma, they're not going to be addressing it from the right angle.
Right. They don't ask. Yeah. Right. As we were talking a little earlier, there's some questions they don't think or don't know to ask. And I always say, I'm a therapist who doesn't believe in long-term talk therapy for most people because talk therapy does not work for you get maybe a dump, like a anxiety dump week to week, or whatever cadence you meet, but it doesn't heat. Like, you could be talking about the same shit in different layers of the onions for 30 years.
You know what? I think we just need to keep going with this topic because it's important for people to understand. And that's the platform of this podcast, is educating people so they can feel better and heal. Let's talk about why talk therapy doesn't work for complex PTSD.
Okay.
Yeah. I have my own point of view on that. What's your point of view on why, and I'm just going to grab my little brain model here, why that doesn't work necessarily? Because, go ahead.
Well, I think the first 7 years of your life, you're downloading the program, this programming, and it's in you, and it becomes in your being, in your subconscious. And the talking, this is very simplified, and I'll let you do the brain piece, the neuropsych piece. What was I just lost my train of thought? Sorry.
Well, you were saying, like, in the first 7 years of life, when you say we have this programming, we're given a ton of suggestions. This is grass, this is green, this is the sky, it's blue. You're a good person, you're not a good person. We're being programmed and indoctrinated to believe whatever is being told to us.
Exactly. And that's everyone in every culture, whatever culture and family culture it is. And so that's the basis of your core beliefs. And the talking, when you're doing talk therapy, and again, like, there's a place for it, but not for complex trauma.
Complex trauma is kind of rooted in that subconscious.
Exactly.
Right? So if you're trying to talk at the conscious level, you cannot access the feelings and core beliefs. It's kind of rooted more in this older part of our brain, this more primal, primitive part of our brain.
Yes, you're physiologically, your body, your subconscious is running you, so you can do all the talking. And it's also why I don't think like cognitive behavioral therapy is useful for long-term change either. And that's like taboo to say in my industry in some realms,
I appreciate you saying it though, because I don't disagree.
Because that's a top down, it's a top down technique or intervention, whatever you want to call it. You can know something in your brain, but if your subconscious doesn't know that, it's irrelevant. Your subconscious is running you. And the other, I just want to say really quick is, I just lost my train of thought again. So go ahead.
I hate it, but, but I think, this is what's important. This is what I'm thinking as you're saying this, so I can try to get people to understand. You come into my office or you go into Sherry's office and you're 50 years old. And consciously shit, right? You're a good person. You're a smart person. You live your life with good integrity, but yet you do not embody it. You do not feel it. You feel like a fraud. Your confidence is really low. You don't have good self-esteem, and that's negatively impacting your relationships, the way you interact with the world, what have you. And maybe this will work, and it's a little bit parts work, right? But the reality is that at 50 years old, you do know these things, but the part of you that's running that lack of self-confidence, that lack of self-esteem is actually a much younger part of you.
Yes.
Right. And it's the part that developed this core belief that you were not enough at whatever age you were. Let's just say for shits and giggles, 6. Right. So that part is very young and it's very powerful. And this is why, you hear now on social media a lot, people talk about inner child work and working with your inner child. And that's kind of the value of doing that work. So you can dialogue with the part of you that is the part that doesn't feel enough or doesn't feel worthy of feeling seen or lacks confidence or has that imposter syndrome or is that inner chatter that's not positive, right?
And that's, if I can interject,
yes,
because I remembered what I was going to add, which is, this is a good point of the conversation. That's why affirmations don't work if you haven't done some of this inner, like younger work with these parts of you, because you can do all the affirmations. You can put it on your mirror with sticky notes and you can say, I'm good enough, or I'm the best, or whatever. You can say, I'm beautiful. What you can say all of that, and you can say it every day. But until you've given some compassion and worked with and spoken to and helped that 6-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 13-year-old that doesn't believe that, it's kind of irrelevant. It is irrelevant.
As a coach, sometimes, depending on the situation, I'll use what's a very universal, well understood model of circumstances and thoughts and feelings and, actions and outcomes and all these different things. And sometimes I'll pull it out, I'll pull out a whiteboard and I'll start mapping it out so they can actually see what's happening. But what's missing from this model of circumstance, thought, feelings, actions, and outcomes is the core belief. Because if you look at how you feel in a moment, right? Something happens. The thing that stops you is not what you think, it's how you feel. And if I say to the person, well, let's think about what were all the things you were thinking that generated that feeling, they know what that is. And then I say, here's what's missing in this model. Here's where it's flawed. Your thought is generated by your belief system. Your thought is generated based on how you believe things about yourself, because that then influences how you see the world and how you interact with other people. So you can't just change your fucking thought. Sorry, you just can't. It makes me so angry. And, the reality is it's painful for me to watch people go out there and say, just think more positively. Because there's a lot of people then who, because their core belief system is not relevant anymore and it's not productive because they do have complex PTSD and they don't know it,
Right.
then they feel even worse because they actually don't know the tools yet to how to change their thinking. So then that further validates, see, I'm so fucked up. I can't even change my thought. So now it's creating
And then
more
there's
shame and blame for the person. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And then there's spiraling of
missing.
Yeah, that's exactly the shame from that is like that. I can't even be a positive I can't even think good thoughts about myself. I'm really
because I'm that broken.
Yeah.
You know, and I had somebody recently come to me that's gone through a lot of different modalities to heal something very specific. And she literally said to me, I'm treatment resistant. And I said, you know, carefully, with all due respect, how many of the people that were treating you were trained in trauma? Because I knew what the trauma was. And by the way, it's complex PTSD, right? It's not this overt thing. This is someone that grew up very privileged, that had a very, on the outside, everything looked great, but there was some dysfunction within the family system that had a massive impact. And you know, because now you've spent all this money and all this resource on getting all the best modalities, but none of them have been trauma informed. And therefore you can't take the appropriate angle. And then it doesn't work. It just sends a message to the person of, see, it's not, you're going to be like this for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you're just kind of doomed.
You're doomed.
And therapy doesn't work.
And it breaks my heart because it's complicated, but it's really not that complicated once you can understand it. And once somebody like yourself or I or anybody else who's trauma trained can break it down in an easily digestible way. Because trauma is never the event, right? Trauma is a series of experiences that simply left you interpreting life through a very specific lens at a very young age that maybe at the time was appropriate, but it's not anymore.
Yeah, the lens protected you when you needed it to, and now it's 30, 40 years later.
But the thing is you can change the lens.
Yes.
And that's where you come in, and that's where I come in. And I know I said we were going to talk about burnout. However, I want to stay on this. Is that okay with you?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, because I am going to have you back a few times. Okay. What I'd like to be able to talk about is why, and this can be a touchy subject, why people are not diagnosed with CPTSD, why the therapists are not stating that it's CPTSD, and where's the break in that system? Because I'll tell you a story.
Yeah, please.
And we'll use it as a catalyst. So you're getting trained in parts work. I'm getting trained in parts work. We both are getting trained in it because we know it's a really relevant methodology and system to help people who are dealing with complex PTSD, right?
Right.
Okay. So I decide that I would like my own IFS therapist. So I do some research, I go out, I go to the IFS Institute, I go to Psychology Today, and I find a handful of people. I vet a couple of them. I have a session with each one of them, and I pick one. And by the way, I love this guy. He's phenomenal. Okay. So I start seeing him. And my goal is to continue to resolve, like, resulting shit from complex PTSD. I know my life. So anyway, I go for my first session and he knows what I do. Okay. So he knows what I know. And at the end of the first session, he goes, I don't take your insurance. I said, yes, I'm aware. And he said, but I'll give you a super bill and then you can submit it because that's what we had talked about. And I've had to do that for years. So I know how to do that. Not a problem. And then he starts to chuckle and he goes, so on the super bill, I have to put a diagnosis from the DSM-5. I go, you sure do. And then he goes, what do you think I should put? And I said, I think you should put developmental trauma disorder, but you can't because they didn't put it in the book. And he started to laugh. And then he goes, okay. And I go, and then the most obvious choice would be complex PTSD, but you can't put that diagnosis either because that's also not in the DSM-5. And he starts chuckling and he goes, so we're left with anxiety and PTSD. Which do you want? And I said, put the PTSD because it's most in alignment with my situation. He goes, great. And we're having a chuckle about it because we both know it's crap, right?
Right.
I get into my car and I was like, my God, if 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, a therapist had said to me, listen, I have to put a diagnosis down because that's part of the job of the therapist, right? We have to diagnose and treat.
Yes.
I don't because I'm a coach.
Right.
If they had come to me and said the diagnosis is PTSD, a couple of things would have happened. I would have affixed myself to that label.
Yeah.
I would have had the thought process of, you see, my childhood was so fucked up that I actually have PTSD from it. It would have affected the way that I saw myself and navigated the rest of the world because I would have accepted that label as like something I embody and a part of my life that I can't change. And I feel like I would have dragged it like a ball and chain for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And I felt so grateful that I knew that all this guy was trying to do was pick one diagnosis that in some way, shape, or form most aligned with what I'm struggling with, but it actually isn't super appropriate. Okay. So that was pretty, it is unfortunate, but I share that because that's the reality of how a lot of these diagnoses are made. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
Oh, I would completely agree. I mean, I can tell you in my own, I hate giving diagnoses for exactly what you're saying because they often don't fit. And then I'm trying to give the most general one that will allow the person to get reimbursed because there, I mean, I could get into the whole like medical complex industry issues, but that's what I agree. I fully agree. I don't, if you're getting a label, you're now going through life with the lens of that label, and that informs your way you're seeing yourself. You know, in my own, I won't get into the whole thing about burnout, but in my own healing from burnout in the past few years, through the work, and it has been through parts work and tapping, and a couple other, I see this woman who's an amazing trauma. She's a neuroscientist. Her name's Dr. Swack. She's in Needham, Massachusetts. She does some stuff. I don't even know what it's called. She works with your subconscious. It doesn't.
She's like, it works.
She's a neuroscientist who it's been amazing. Like it's for the first time it's really healed. But in my work with her, literally maybe 2 months ago, I went to a session. I came out of that session, and for the first time in my entire life, I thought, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. And that is like, holy shit. Like all these years, I'm like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And it's not because of labels, but I'm connecting it back to, if you're 20 or 18 or 7 or whatever, and you're getting this diagnosis, it helps perpetuate. It's not the only thing, obviously, but it helps perpetuate. I don't know. It
changes the lens through which you then continue to live your life. I mean, right. I want to ask you this. Okay, so this is so important. I'm so glad this is the turn that this talk took because it needed to happen. So I feel really grateful that you're so flexible here and I'm minding your time. But I want to just go back to what you just said, which is you finally felt, how old are you, Sherry?
I'm 45 years old.
Okay.
I have
But for
been
the
in and
first
out of
time in
therapy since I
45
was
years old,
13. Yeah.
since you're 15?
Since I was I've been in and out of therapy in my life since I was 13. This what Dr. Swack does, I can't say is I wouldn't call it therapy, but what it's trauma healing and other things.
Yes. When I've been in and out of something since I was 15 and I'm 52, right?
Yeah, all right,
So
same.
you said something, which is for the first time in my life, I don't feel there's anything wrong with me.
Yeah.
What did you think was wrong with you?
Good question. I thought I was fun. I can't, it wasn't a certain thing, but I felt I was fundamentally flawed. Broke,
And-
like I couldn't ever put my finger on exactly what that thing was. Just there was something that caused me to feel, for me, you were talking earlier, I can't remember if it was on or off the air here, but about there's like these kind of overarching fundamental core beliefs people have, and mine was the one of feeling invisible, unheard, unseen, and unloved for who I actually was, like, why don't they like me type of thing. And people could love me. It didn't matter. It felt that way.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but the feeling was of being just this flawed person.
Right.
Well, everyone's a flawed person, but
of like
unfixable.
And this is, God damn it. Like, this is it. Because I can't count how many people I talk to.
Right.
That this is the pervasive challenge. And here's the loop that it goes through. There's no reason I should feel this way.
Yes.
Because I was never abused. I was never assaulted. There was no violence.
Yes.
There was no anything like this. And I literally have had people say to me, I mean, I never wanted for anything. My family went to Disney every single year. We always had money. I didn't have to struggle. Like, so now there's this shame.
Yes.
That's associated with why I don't feel okay.
Right.
And so therefore, fundamentally, I just must be so fucked up.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever work on me.
Because
there's no real reason why I should feel this way or why I should believe this, which, by the way, guys, the reason why working with the subconscious, and Sherry does that by way of tapping, I do that way with rapid transformational therapy. The reason why working with the subconscious is so important is because that's where your feelings and your belief system resolve. That's where it is. Your conscious mind is your rational thought. But how you feel and how you believe, it's all rooted in your subconscious. So when we can access the subconscious in a very systemic way, like a very systemic methodology, we can then help you start to see where you started feeling that way and what beliefs you started based on those feelings. And if you could choose those feelings and you could choose those beliefs, you can actually choose a different feeling and a different belief, or have the same feeling but choose a different belief. Yeah, that's where,
It's kind of amazing when you do that.
Yeah, but my point is this: if that's the truth, and I believe as someone who does this type of work, that is the reality.
Agreed.
Then everything is workable.
Right.
Everything is fixable.
100%.
Now we get to go from helpless and hopeless to hopeful.
Yes.
That's huge.
I feel happy just hearing you say that.
But isn't that true?
It is. It's completely true.
So it seems complicated, but it's actually really not. You just have to be working with the right person that's trained in the right information. And this is where we get hooked. Right. Because I just assumed if I'm going to a therapist, at 15 years old, at 20 years old, 25, 30, 35, 40. I mean, I can't count how many therapists I saw in a 30-year period of time.
Yes.
Okay. But I still was walking with pervasive panic and anxiety 24/7.
Right.
Even with Zoloft, because I wasn't getting to the root cause of why my system was in this hypervigilant state.
Yes.
So how is it that I went through 10 therapists, let's just say for shits and giggles, and the last 3 were like, I really don't know why you're here, because you pretty much know anything I would tell you.
Oh my goodness.
But I was like, well, then you must know something that I don't know, because I'm not okay. And here's the agreement that I made, Sherry. I come from a long line of people who struggled this way, right? On my dad's side of the family. And my grandmother, I'm giving props to you, Grandma, because I'm just going to tell your fucking story. And I know she's okay with it because she wants to help people as much as I do. And even from the other side, my grandmother, my entire childhood, my entire life that she was alive, was in some sort of deep state of depression and deep clinical, psychotherapy. And she had been on every medication you can possibly think of. She attempted taking her life multiple times throughout my life. She ended up in shock treatment. I mean, this is where she was. It was like, I'm so fucking broken.
Right.
I need to go in and do this shock treatment to fucking scramble shit so I can just start a clean slate.
Right.
Right? And so I knew that. I lived that with her. And my father was raised through that. So of course my dad has his own challenges with anxiety or maybe depression or what have you, right? So when I had therapists and psychiatrists saying to me, you come from a family history of this, and therefore you have a biochemical imbalance, I just accepted that agreement. That just made total sense to me.
Right.
And I'll be honest, when I was on the Zoloft, it worked at the beginning because it did allow my nervous system to breathe.
That's what it's doing. Yes.
And I was like, oh my God. So then I'm now confirming that, you know what? It must have been biochemical because I feel so much better.
Right. Until you don't. And then it's confusing.
Until I don't. So let me make it very, very clear. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional.
Same.
I'm certainly not discrediting biochemical imbalances, and I'm not discrediting any kind of genetic inherited mental health challenge. I'm not discrediting that. But what I'm saying is, just from my own personal experience, I accepted that agreement because it fit in the story that I had heard, and it fit in the story that gave me an answer.
Right. Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started becoming a client of somebody that was a clinical hypnotherapist in my early 40s, where I was still struggling. And she was able to access parts of myself that I had never been able to access in traditional therapy. She was not a therapist. She was coach, but she was a clinical hypnotherapist because she had enough clinical hypnotherapy underneath her. And it changed my life. And I was like, what the hell was this? I would call her a spiritual healer. I would tell everybody, you need to go see this person. She's doing something that's so unique.
That's how I feel about my current healer. That's exactly what I should call her.
Right? I called her my spiritual healer. And I was like literally singing her praises to everyone and everything, because I finally felt for the first time in 30 years, I understand now why I've been so stuck.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So look, guys, we were going to talk about burnout today. we are going to talk about it, but I actually feel really good with this episode because these are things that as a coach, I'm always so scared to actually talk about, because I never want it to come across as though I am slandering the therapy model or the therapy industry, because I'm not. We have a family therapist that we can pull from at any time. there are definitely things that you can do to make sure that the therapist that you're using is trauma informed and trauma trained. And I'll actually put the information into the show notes. Okay. Right. Questions to ask. Because we didn't get to that today. And for time reasons, I want to close it out. But what I love about this episode is as a therapist, you are able to confirm some of the things that I share from time to time. And it's really important. This platform is designed for people who maybe don't have the funds or the resources to be able to see a mental health practitioner, and or they're using it as a supplement to seeing someone. But it's important for them to be educated on what therapists are capable of offering and what they're limited with, unless they're going up and above and getting extra training and knowledge in these areas. So I think this is probably one of the most profound, poignant, important podcasts I'll have done, because I can guarantee that there are going to be people going, fuck, like she just described me. I hear that fundamental flawed comment all the time.
Yes. Yes. And can I add too, from a therapist perspective, I also want to add that it doesn't, I think there's like people think, oh, I have X, Y, and Z issue. I need to go to a therapist. I want to say that I would take a trauma coach like yourself, do hypnotherapist, etc., who is trauma informed and trained over it doesn't have to be a therapist. Like wherever, it doesn't have, I think a trauma trained informed coach, where this is the basis of your work, I would take that over a non-trauma trained or at all or informed therapist any day. So I just want to note that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, to just back that up, I cannot count in numbers how many clients I've seen that are perplexed after we've spent an hour together. Because they don't understand why some of the very simple fundamental things I've shared have never been shared with them. And I'll even say that I have coached a handful of therapists.
Yeah. And
the first time I did it, I was like, oh, and then I knew going forward, but I wanted to talk about the window of tolerance, right? So you've done Janina Fisher, maybe you know some of Deb Dana's work. There's this concept of the window of tolerance. And the first time I brought it to a client of mine that was a therapist for 35 years, she did not know what I was talking about.
Oh.
And I go, so, was in your window of tolerance. And I got this like blank stare. And I was like, oh, do you know what the window of tolerance is? And she said, no. And I have some really great, materials that I've purchased over the years. And I pulled it up on Zoom and I showed it to her and she was gobsmacked. She had never heard of it. She didn't know what it is. It is like one of the foundations of my whole practice.
Right, right.
And it explains a lot of that polyvagal theory and what's happening internally in our system that we like to label as anxiety or depression or panic or stress or overwhelm. And that was a huge eye-opener to me. It was a huge eye-opener to me. And so now when I do work with therapists, I'm very quick to ask, like, what's your understanding of complex PTSD? Because that's usually what they're coming to me with.
Right. Yeah. I think there's definitely many of us who, yeah. No, we're not trained. There's not, as we said in the beginning of the episode. So.
Yeah. So I love that you said that because I'm very, 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 very careful of saying that because I don't want people to think that I'm trying to dissuade them any other way. My job always and my mission always has just been to be the mouthpiece. And if somebody wants to come and work with me because they feel the connection, fantastic. But I don't have any desire to say, I'm better than, or coaches are better than, or whatever. I try to be as neutral as possible, but thank you, because I don't disagree.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's people in the therapy industry who might hear this and
I'll have a
be
hater.
very mad at me that I would, non-clinical people and blah, blah, blah. But I'd rather have a trained person who's not who's not a therapist than an untrained therapist, just because the title doesn't mean anything.
Listen, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to do what we think our clients need, which is peace within their lives, right? And so this, again, I want to really wrap it up because I know you have some place to be, but I cannot thank you enough for this real, honest conversation. We will be having Sherry back. No question about it. We're going to have, I promise, the next episode, we're going to talk about burnout, but her and I are going to take the angle of what is burnout and how is it related to complex PTSD. I may also have her back to talk about ADHD, again, within relation to complex PTSD. And we're also going to have a talk, perhaps, if we can make it all work, about adult children of narcissistic parents. Yeah. So honestly, Sherry, you're amazing.
Oh, likewise. The feeling's mutual.
Thank you so much for your honest conversation. And I know for sure this is going to be incredibly helpful to a lot of people.
It's my pleasure.
That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you for doing this podcast. I'm sorry I just interrupted you again, but thank you for doing this podcast.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Guys, if this spoke to you, all the information is in the show notes. I'll make sure that we also put into the show notes a list of questions to ask your therapist to see if they are trauma informed, right? Because if that's where you feel like you're going, and we'll even put into the show notes some very simple to understand resources so you can decide maybe if you fall under that complex PTSD realm as well. I have a couple of books. And if you like it, you want to subscribe because we're always dropping a cast. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.